an overstatement either. We were in Europe for like 24 days this year and also last year, and we filmed and filmed and filmed. We went to different places in America and filmed and filmed and filmed. And so we've got lots and lots of raw footage. And the reason why we're doing this, there is a hidden history, which is in plain sight. The mounds in Ohio, the mounds down all the way down the Mississippi Valley, down to the Gulf, they're everywhere. And we see the same exact type thing over in England. And when I was just there in July at a place called Amesbury, looking at this gigantic mound, which is extremely, it looked exactly like Newark, Ohio, except the moat was like 30 feet deep and was made out of chalk. And the question is, how do ancient people cut the chalk and move the chalk? I mean, it's the same old thing. So there's a mound there called Salisbury Hill. And I'm in front of that, and I look at the camera and go, am I in Ohio or somewhere else? Because you can't tell. The mound is almost identical to what we would call an Adena mound that we see in Ohio and elsewhere. So something else is going on. And there's a narrative which is sacrosanct amongst archaeologists and anthropologists that hold tenure at universities and teach these subjects to, as Rush Limbaugh would say, young skulls full of mush. And so when they come out of 4 years or 6 years or 8 years, they hold and toe the party line. There's no doubt about that. And they parrot what they have learned in school. Well,
wow.
Thank God in some ways I did not go that route and become an archaeologist or anthropologist. I work with them. Rick Woodward is our team's anthropologist. He's also an archaeologist. Mondo Gonzalez is an archaeologist on our team. Dr. Michael Alday is an MD. And Dr. Malcolm Warren is also an MD, but a chiropractor. And these guys have examined these elongated skulls, let's say, which will be the fourth episode. We're going to get into the whole DNA and what really happened and how it started from 2013 to the present day, because we need to get out ahead of what some other people are saying that it's their discovery and they were the ones that did the DNA and all this stuff, and it's just not true. And we spent tens of thousands of dollars. So I hadn't planned on doing this till maybe film episode number 8 or 9, and that's been reworked in the order of things. And I'm actually in the edit booth now, and I'm in post-production with it. Richard Shaw, before he passed away, sent me 2 terabytes of film. Lucky me. And I've gone over. I mean, I've skimmed it through some of it very quickly, but there's a lot there. And it's not gonna be like a 3-hour anthology, but it will be to show the progression between 2013 and the present day. Look, all this stuff is connected. The elongated skulls and Paracas, which they insist, and you'll notice just recently, Drudge Report had this thing on elongated skulls, and every now and then it pops up in the news, and it's always the same thing. Oh, these people were cradle headboarded, yada yada yada. Well, how do they know that? They don't know that. They're just guessing. They're parroting what they learned in school. That's what they were taught in school, so that's what they're parroting. Meanwhile, our anthropologist, and this is his discovery, Rick Woodward, turned the skulls upside down and looked at the base of a skull and said, wait a minute, the foramen magnum, which is the hole where the spinal column comes up and attaches itself to the brain, is in a totally different place and a different size. And you cannot push the rear plate of a child's head back towards the foramen magnum. In other words, this is genetic. Right. This is a whole different deal. And see, it's funny, the naysayers, and I won't mention them or give them credit, they attack our DNA. Oh, well, it's contaminated. Well, if it's contaminated, why didn't we get nuclear DNA then? If it's such contamination, why has nuclear DNA been so elusive? The fact is it wasn't contaminated. And the reason why they chime in and say that is because they don't like the result, including the archaeologist Ruben Soto. And because he threw me under the bus, I'll sort of throw him under the bus. But yeah, I mean, he won't have anything to do with this now because he didn't like the results. And the last time I saw him in Peru several months ago, I was with the director of the Inca Museum. He goes, oh, it's all contaminated. It was all contaminated. Went all around the world and people contaminated. Not true. The chain of custody was done by Chase Klotzigan. She did a very stellar job making sure everything was sealed up. We were in full body suits from head to toe, double gloves. We sprayed each other between every testing that we did. We took 58 samples. Out of the 58 samples, 28 of them sequenced, most of those from Senior Wands Museum. Out of the 28 that were sequenced, many of them pointed to a Middle East or Eastern European or European origin. That rewrites history. People don't like that because, well, it's not Peruvian. These people were from Peru. No, they weren't. They weren't from Peru. They were from the Middle East and Eastern Europe and the Baltic Sea area. So this is what we're up against, just like in our film. And this is why we're on the trail, because the Paracas people may be one of the Nephilim tribes. And what's interesting is the Anakim translates long neck. And the more I get into this, the more I see that in the Levant, during the conquest of Joshua and Caleb, there are different tribes in the Levant, the Zanzumim, the Emim, the Nephilim, the Anakim, the Rephaim. These names may denote different genetic appearances. Anakim means long necks. And what was interesting is Marshall Moore, who had no idea of the Anakim, none, absolutely none, never heard the word before except on Star Wars, Anakim Skywalker, okay? So she's looking at the position of the foramen magnum, that brain hole at the base of the skull, and she's going, because she's like a forensic artist, and she goes, you know, for this person to have walked and functioned, they had to have a longer neck. So she sends me a picture. And the neck is really elongated. And I write her back and I say, Marcia, are you aware? Do you know what the Anakim is? And it blew her out of the water. It blew me out of the water. So is there a correlation between the mound builders and the Paracas? We think, and our hypothesis has always been, that during the conquest of Canaan by Joshua and Caleb, these tribes that were there, which I just mentioned, fled the area. Some went northward into Europe, and we see the vestiges of that. They also came into the Americas. The copper trade was very vibrant. Fritz Zimmerman, who's collaborated on 3 of the films so far, he didn't go to Europe with us because of some health issues, but he collaborated on the first 3 films. Fritz believes, as I do, that what we're looking at is the vestiges of the Amorites. Let me tell you something here, guys. And if there are listeners who are out there who are astronomers or amateur astronomers, please get a hold of me at la@marzulli.net. So here's the greatest mystery to me, that the Octagon Mound, which is about 50 acres, got that? You know what 50 acres looks like? That's how big the Octagon Mound is. And you can only really see it from the air. I've been in it twice. When you're there on the ground looking at it, you have no idea what shape it is. But you fly a drone 800 feet up, you start to get a feel just how big this thing is. And even at 800 feet, I couldn't get the whole thing. I had to move the camera from right to left. So it's an irregular octagon. We are looking at advanced mathematics, trigonometry. And here's the rub. These mounds, the Great Circle Mound, the Octagon Mound Complex in Ohio, Newark, Ohio, the America Stonehenge, and other places, including the Serpent Mound in Ohio, are built, and by the way, America Stonehenge is in New Hampshire, are built on an 18-and-a-half-year lunar cycle. This is where any of you listening and can give me insight into this, please email me, la@lamarzulli.net. How does one 5,000 years ago get up in the morning, look at the moon, and go, you know, guys, the moon's doing something, we need to track it? And they have no idea how long the lunar cycle is. None. Okay. So they wake up because no one's ever told them. And they look at the moon and they track the moon. It waxes and it wanes. Maybe they put some sticks in the ground. I don't know what they do. But how would they know where they're year 4, year 2, year 12, year 9? Get where I'm going with this? In the cycle, they wouldn't know. And how would they record the data? And how would they crunch the data to know, oh, wait, we saw this 8 years ago. We must be, 18 and a half years ago. So now we know it's an 18-and-a-half-year lunar cycle. Wow. But what happens if it rains for 3 or 4 days and you can't see the moon? See where I'm going with this? And this is like, I can't get an answer from anybody. Nobody knows. Well, the Book of Enoch, which as Christians, we don't believe it's part of our canon. Okay, I get that. But we can certainly appreciate its historicity. The Book of Enoch tells us, and I quote, that one of the fallen angels, the original 200 Watcher angels that descended on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared, one of the 200 Watcher angels was named Sariel. who showed the humans, that's us, the lunar calendar.
Right.
That's what they showed us. They showed us the precession of the moon and the lunar calendar. In other words, the information was handed to us.
Right.
And that's what I think happened 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. So all this is embedded in the films.
Okay. Well, that is an excellent overview of what you're going to be covering in these films. And real quick, just in case we lost anybody, I wanted to go back real quick to the Mounds, since they are such a focus of the upcoming films. For those who may not know a whole lot about the Mounds, or what they are, or where they are, or, well, why they are is one of the bigger questions. For somebody who may not have heard about this, what are the Mounds? Where are they? And why are they so peculiar?
Well, they go up from the northern part of the Americas, even into southern Canada, and all the way down, following the Mississippi for the most part, to the Gulf of Mexico. The largest mound is in Cahokia, right outside St. Louis. I've been there, and it's mind-boggling. And they will tell us that Cahokia took 300 years to build, but there was some soil work done on it fairly recently, and this person said, no, it wasn't. It was built in less than 20 years. So now they're not even sure about that. They changed. They're so sure. This is what drives me nuts. They're so sure about themselves. And when you challenge their view, you get scoffed at, laughed at, yelled at, removed from the museum or the site. I mean, all these different things. It's just incredible, just for challenging the view. So that's roughly 450,000 tons of earth. So you say, well, LA, I don't know what 450,000 tons of earth look like, okay? Hold that number. There's another mound that's down in Louisiana, where we photographed and filmed extensively there with Rick Woodward. It's called Poverty Point. Now, these names were not, in other words, no one knows what the people who built them actually called them. Poverty Point's older than Cahokia. It's upwards of 5,000 years old. It's probably one of the oldest mounds. It's got advanced trigonometry, advanced mathematics, knowledge of the precession, knowledge of the lunar calendar. All this stuff is embedded in the mound, okay? 390,000 tons of earth. But wait, it gets better. There's a site up in Ohio. It's called Fort Ancient. Again, it's a name that people just gave it. No one knows who built it. No one knows what they called it. No one even knows what the people who built it called themselves. But they'll make up a whole story. Oh, it's the Adena. It's the Hopewell people. They just make up names. Hopewell was a frickin' farmer who found some artifacts. So they named this entire culture after Hopewell. This is how absurd the whole thing gets.
Right.
Fort Ancient has 3.5 miles of walls with, I believe, 66 gates. When we were there on the spring equinox, okay, Peggy, my wifey, took out her sky chart and pointed it at the gate. Above the gate was the constellation, the Serpent Hydra. That, my friends, is absolutely deliberate. Who is the prince of the power of the air, and who is the serpent? And all this stuff, all these sites have embedded serpent iconography. We believe that there are 66 gates in Fort Ancient. And when you're there, when I got out of the car, I looked at Fritz and I went, oh my gosh. Oh, I was speechless. I mean, I just sat there and stared at it in utter disbelief. And they haven't, the thing is 3.5 miles of continuous walls, creating a very irregular shape on this high place. And it's not a burial and it's not a fort. If you were to deconstruct that dirt, okay, deconstruct Fort Ancient, you would get end to end 200 miles of dump trucks, end to end, bumper to bumper.
Wow.
200 miles of dump trucks. And we're supposed to believe that Native Americans took primitive flint hoes, deer antlers, pointed sticks, and moved the dirt one basket at a time. No one ever talks about the compaction. No one ever talks about the fact that some of this dirt comes from a mile away. And when I press archaeologists on them, I get, well, they use dogs. So let me get this straight. A hunter-gatherer culture, which, basically are hunter-gatherers, There is no refrigeration. They're living hand and mouth. Yeah, you can smoke fish. I get that. You can make jerky. I get that. But the winter months are cold and game is scarce. And the ground freezes. So you have a window of time in which to construct mounds. So how's this done now? And there are thousands of mounds all over the country. There are 10,000 mounds alone in Ohio. Wow. It doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. But they insist that Hopewell built them.
Yeah, so the official story is that these mounds are what, burial mounds for Native Americans?
Some are burial, some are they use for markings and ceremonial purposes, ritualistic purposes. We maintain that these are Nephilim sites. It's fallen angel technology, Nephilim architecture. When you go to the Serpent Mound, it's the largest serpent iconography on the planet. And the undulations of the serpent, once again, point out the equinoxes, the solstices, and everything else. It's also based on an 18-and-a-half-year lunar cycle. The serpent is in the act of doing something with its mouth. The mouth is wide open. In front of him, in front of a serpent, is what appears to be an egg. New Agers will tell us the serpent denotes wisdom, and the serpent is giving birth to the egg so mankind can have knowledge. We say nonsense. The serpent hails back to Genesis 3:15, where Jesus is in the garden with Adam and Eve, who just blew it, and the serpent, the dragon, is over there too. And he looks at the serpent and says, your seed, your offspring, will be at enmity, at war with the offspring, the seed of the woman. He, Messiah, will come and crush your head, you will bruise his heel. That sets up the rest of the biblical prophetic narrative. That serpent, if we are right, that serpent is in the act of swallowing, destroying the egg. And you can only see this when you're up with the drone a couple of 100 feet. When you're down in there, it's very hard to see what you're looking at. They've even built like I think it's a 2.5-story tower where you can kind of get a glimpse of what you're looking at. But when you fly the drone above it, it is unbelievable. Who is the prince of the power of the air? And that serpent iconography, we believe, was built thousands of years ago by the Nephilim, the giants that were there. And here's something else which we really find interesting, that when we were there last, there's new signage. This is unbelievable. New signage. The Shawnee built it. The Shawnee constructed the Serpent Mound. Well, Chief Joseph comes on the record in all three of the series, all three of the films. And Chief Joseph is a First Nation person. He's a peace chief from the Tiano tribe. In fact, we'll be doing some filming with the chief in the up and coming months. I can't wait for that. But Chief Joseph tells us, and he pointed me to the article where Chief Wallace of the Shawnee, get this now, stated on the record that they did not build the Serpent Mound, that the Shawnee people did not build the Serpent Mound. And Chief Joseph, on camera, you can see he starts to fume. He's angry because he's saying, well, this isn't just a bunch of white settlers, 200 years ago telling us what we did or what we didn't do. This is a bunch of white settlers, and he sort of laughs, 20 or 30 years ago or sooner or closer to where we are in the timeline, telling us what we're looking at. And it's a great injustice, and it is a great injustice. When the chief of the Shawnee state on the record that they, the Shawnee, did not build the Serpent Mound, and these white anthropologists come in and say, no, you did build the Serpent Mound. If someone like me says, hey, wait a minute, guys, the Shawnee say that they didn't do it. Well, Marzulli, you're a racist. Really? Who's the racist now? Because you're not believing what the Shawnee chief is telling you. You disregard what she says. Who's the racist? Who's the real racist here? You guys have an agenda. You have an agenda, and you offer no explanation. How was the Serpent Mound made? How was it constructed? And some people believe that there was mica. Who's the shiny one? Who is the Nakash? There was mica all along the undulating body. So that must have been incredibly impressive thousands of years ago.
Yeah, wow. Now, when it comes to these mounds, the presupposition that these were burial mounds, I mean, wouldn't it just be kind of easy to do some sort of X-ray or seismic something or other scan and see if there's bodies or skeletons in there? What's the basis of their studies?
Well, there's a couple things here. We think that Native Americans used some of these sites as second burials. In other words, the mounds were there and they buried their dead near the top of the mound. We get that. But some of the older mounds, like let's say when you go to Graves Creek Mound, which we've been to several times, that's in the film. And they talk about giants that were found there. But of course, the official narrative is there were no giants that were found there. Well, when we're coming out of the museum, this is in Mathematical Mysteries of the Mound Builders, the second film in the series, we find a lithograph on the wall. Okay, and what you have to understand is the museum was originally built into the mound, and what they discovered was the dirt was compacted so tightly they didn't need any bracing. And they had the skeleton on display that it looks like it's a 9-footer to me. It's in the film. You be the judge. And it's in a lithograph. We tried to trace down where the lithograph was published and has so far been unsuccessful. The trail with this stuff, guys, you're looking 150 years ago. It gets very, very cold when you try to find things, but it blows out completely the idea that, wait a minute, you're saying there's no giants. What's this lithograph doing here? Oops, we hate when we find something that counteracts our argument. But we know from the Smithsonian's own record, and I have Mondo Gonzalez has been researching this, from the Bureau of Ethnicity's own records, that unusually large skeletons were found in these mounds, everything from 7 feet up to 12 feet. The one I found out on Catalina was a 9-footer, essentially a 9-footer. And this corroborates the archaeologist who was out there, a primitive archaeologist, Ralph Glidden, 1919 and 1921, who was employed by the Hay Museum. Later, that the Hay got gobbled up by the Smithsonian. But Ralph Glidden's out there digging away, and he finds a race of what he calls 9-foot giants. And lo and behold, we have a photograph of it. And when I published that photograph, we went back to the museum, the late Richard Shaw and I, and there's the photograph blown up on the wall, except they've cut the giant out of the picture. So we photographed and filmed that, and that went viral. And I was on History Channel's In Search of the Lost Giants with the Vieira brothers, talking about my work, my discovery. See, this is what drives me nuts, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's my work. That's my discovery. I was the guy that went out to Catalina Island, searched the archives. I found the photograph. I had it analyzed. There's a bunch of knuckleheads on YouTube which take the photograph, because I can't copyright the photograph, but they take it and they use it in their video, and they never give me a nod. They never say where it was from or even how they know it was a giant. We had 3 people that examined that photograph, and that photograph clearly shows that there's a giant there. It's just around 9 feet. It's not an exact measurement because it's a photograph, for crying out loud. What happened to those bones? So we know that stuff is out there. It was reported over and over and over again. And, it's a hidden history. So you say, well, why is it obfuscated, LA? It's obfuscated because it points back to the validity of the biblical worldview, thus a supernatural worldview, and that most of these people who are archaeologists, anthropologists, not all, but many, are ardent Darwinists. I got into not a heated exchange, but a lively exchange with an archaeologist at a museum, and I won't tell you what state it was in, but we were the only people, Peggy and I were the only people there on a Sunday morning, and we were looking at the artifacts, and he had mounds on his, in his, not in his museum, but the museum was next to a mound complex. And so I asked him, and we got into this whole thing about the mounds and how it was done. And all he would do is spew out the party line. And when I talked to him about the advanced mathematics and the lunar precession and the fact that Native Americans didn't have surveying techniques or the use and the knowledge of trigonometry or the lunar precession, how was this done? They have answers for everything. And if you come up with something that they don't have an answer, they just dismiss it and dismiss you. Finally, I just looked at the guy and I said, "You're a Darwinist, aren't you? You're a Darwinist." And he looked at me and said, "Well, yeah." And I say, "So you don't believe in the supernatural, do you?" He goes, "Well, I believe in the spiritual. I go, no, you don't believe in the supernatural. And that's the deal, because there is no God. The Bible is just a bunch of mythos, that all the supernatural events that we read about in the Bible really didn't happen. Let me jump to what I talked about on my show last night, Acceleration Radio. Recently, this was on the Drudge Report yesterday, that archaeologists find in Gath, the city of Goliath, they may have found Goliath's birthplace. Well, after 22 years, some knucklehead decides, well, maybe we should just dig a little further and see what's there. Okay. It's just maddening. So after 22 years or 23 years, whatever, they decide to dig a little deeper. Lo and behold, they find another city. And guess what? The stones there are not head-sized stones. The stones there are 6.5 feet in length. Hello.
Wow.
How was that done? How was that done? And then the archaeologist has the audacity. This is how they spin it. Well, we found this. Maybe this is how these stories of giants came about, because of these large stones that were there. Well, it's just maddening. You look at that and you go, you guys really have an axe to grind, man. You have an axe to grind. So, the skeletons, many of them were unearthed in the 19th century, and account after account after account tells us that the Smithsonian was contacted, the Smith came out, they took the bones, never seen or heard of again. So that's what we're up against, guys, and we're pushing back. We're pushing back.
So, man, it's crazy, because if these things are verified, it really does validate the supernatural worldview, the biblical account of things, the fringier side, of course, of the biblical account, which long on this show we've been talking about how those things seem to fit a lot better than the kind of narratives that we receive in the universities there. We're finding these skeletons, they're covering it up. Obviously, that goes to show why they're compartmentalizing society, right? Why they want to continue to control the information flow, and we're seeing that at a more public level at this point. But in terms of these entities, first off, are they still around is my question. Are they hiding somewhere? Or at the same time, with these mounds, what do you think they were doing with these mounds? Is it where they lived? What was the purpose of building them by these beings?
Question one first. Yes, they're here. Our work on the Kandahar Giant was that was the film that got me noticed by the deep state, where I was approached and threatened. I don't mind telling this publicly, because in case I ever commit suicide, you know that I didn't. In case I ever find child porn on my computer or my iPhone, I didn't put it there. Or if one of my children go missing, you know that it was done by the deep state. I was threatened in those three ways by the deep state, specifically for our work on the Kandahar Giant. They didn't like that. And the first thing he told me, what kind of car do you drive? And I said, I drive what I affectionately call my go-kart. It's a 1991 sports car. Guy goes, well, does it have a computer? I go, yeah, it does. He goes, well, we can access that computer and make it so the gas pedal will stick, and you'll have an accident. And about a month or two after that threat, I'm driving up the canyon, one of the canyons in the Santa Monica Mountains. I'm doing 55, which is the speed limit, doing a little over 55, and I made this turn. And as I made the turn, it's a 2-lane road, and on my right-hand side, the passenger side, about 20 feet away is a cliff, essentially. If you go over there, you're dead. And I heard this doink, well, something went pop, and I lost control of the steering. There was no steering. And I jammed on the brakes and slid into the dirt and gravel and got out. And when the tow truck driver came, I showed him the serpentine belt and said, what does this look like to you? The guy just looks at me and goes, do you have any enemies? That's what he said. Do you have any enemies? Yeah. So that was the first one. The second one was, he said, well, what kind of phone do you have? I go, I have an iPhone. Is it secure? I go, no. Well, when they arrest you, LA, they could arrest you for child porn. I was going, you got to be kidding me, right? And the third one was, how many children do you have? I have 2. He goes, well, one could go missing and never be found again. I mean, that's how they play. And I look at the guy and I said, you're right. You can do all that to me. You guys have all the power. I'm just a little worm. You guys can squish me. But here's the deal, pal. You can't do that unless the Most High God allows it. Okay? You can't do that unless the Most High God allows it. So that was our work on the giant of Kandahar. We've had people come up to us since the giant of Kandahar, and what we realized, it's a different giant than what Steve Quayle talked about. Different year, different location. Different year, different location. Since then, we've had other people that were in the services come on the record. They won't give their names. I know who they are, but they won't, come on camera or on film. But they all know about it. They all know about it. They all talk about it. So they're there. They're laying in wait. These are the Nephilim, and as I said earlier, in other podcasts and other shows, we don't know what we're looking at here. We don't know how old these things really are. In other words, are they 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years old? We don't know. We don't know. They live in caves, and they're up in Kandahar, in the Kandahar province. I had one soldier that told me, oh yeah, all the villagers up there know about it. They would leave goats outside the town, leave the goat out there, and then the goat would vanish because the giant would come in and take the goat. It was an offering. So the giant won't come in and kill people. So they give him the goat. He eats the goat. So, I realize to some people that sounds wacky. I've talked to people that have seen them, and it's not wacky. It's terrifying. So that's your first question. They are here. They are still roaming the earth. What was part two?
Part two is basically, what were the mounds used for? Why did they build them?
Yeah. We discovered something while we were in Portugal, which I can't tell you yet, which we were utterly blown away by. And it's all on film. We discovered it while the cameras were rolling. But we know that the sites, there's connectivity between them. And I show this in my book, On the Trail of a Nephilim. I've talked about it numerous times, but it only scratches the surface of it. America's Stonehenge is a 4,000-year-old site. We believe it's a Phoenician site, as does Dennis Stone, who owns the place and has spent his entire life researching it. And when you go to the summer solstice standing stone, where the sun sets on the summer solstice, and you draw a line from the center of their henge in New Hampshire out to the summer solstice standing stone on Google Earth, and you continue to draw the line, and it will go thousands of miles, and eventually you will split the center trilithon in Stonehenge, England.
What's the center trilithon?
Yeah, in Stonehenge, England.
What is that part now? I'm sorry, the center trilithon.
Okay, 2 upright pillars of stone and a cross-piece, a lentil on top. And these are megaliths. They weigh a lot of tonnage, and it splits that thing dead center.
Wow.
So yeah, and you can't do this in the ancient world unless you're in the air, unless you know trigonometry, unless you can have 3 points on the ground and do it that way. You just there's no way to do it. And you show that to archaeologists. Well, that's a really interesting coincidence, LA. Wow, I didn't know that. There's a connectivity because it's Nephilim architecture, fallen angel technology. I believe these sites were all connected, part of a grid system, part of a way of communication, part of a way of traveling. All that's been lost. And I think the Most High God destroyed many of these sites.
So you think there was kind of like a World Wide Web back then?
Bingo. That's exactly what it was. The enemy, in the days of Noah, there was a World Wide Web, but it was different than what we have now. 4,000, 5,000 years ago, the web was recreated and then destroyed. In modernity, where we are now, the web is back, and right now it's benign. But is it really? When Google can send out a blast to millions and millions of people and affect the election, is it really benign? Of course not. And that's what people don't understand. It's over. And I don't want to be a fatalist here, but if any of these clowns who are running for office on the Democratic side get into office, you can kiss this nation as we know it goodbye. And I mean that. All we need to do is look at the dystopia, which is becoming California. 30 years of liberal policies have completely ruined my state, our state, completely ruined it. And the homeless population, the needles everywhere, the opioid crisis. And oh, by the way, we'll just let as many homeless people as possible. We'll give them free stuff, yada, 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 from across the border. But God forbid if someone like Ellie Marzulli's house burns down, along with 800 and some odd people who lost their house in the fire. Let's make it as onerous and as hard as possible to get that building permit. Now, so far, it's been 9 months since the fire, and we don't have a building permit. We'll see what happens. And if it becomes crazy, I will go public with it. So far, they've been fair, but it's 9 months and we don't, we're no closer now. We've got plans drawn. We want to rebuild. I miss it. I lived there for 40 years. That's my home. And the Lord gave that to me. And he gave me a stone, which I'm holding in my hand. It's on my desk. It's a promise stone. The Lord said, when I was there in May, he said, reach down and pick up a stone. I said, Lord, why? He said, pick up a stone. I picked up a stone from the circle of river rock, which I had created like 39 years ago. And the Lord spoke to me and said, that's your promise stone. The land is yours. The land is yours. And I just broke down and wept because I didn't expect that. And we're going to rebuild, and I'm excited about it. And I love what the Lord's done with us. We're in Oklahoma, but it's culture shock in some ways. I love the people here. The freeways are not crowded all day. It's just great that way. The restaurants are great. But it's, I lived in the Santa Monica Mountains by the ocean, and I'm landlocked here about as far away from the ocean as you can get. So I miss it. And, we will rebuild and go from there. But, I digress. The bottom line is that we are looking at in this country, for instance, and we just talked about, Google affecting the election. That's what they do between Google and Facebook and YouTube. I mean, they can silence, Christian people like you and me who have a conservative voice. I mean, I can't monetize anything on YouTube anymore. That's why we have our sponsor, Jingos. Right. Jingos, and this stuff really works, and they sponsor us. Thank God we have a sponsor. So, but we were completely demonetized, everything that we did, not suitable for advertisers. That's what we heard constantly. Yeah. So, we are, what I'm trying to say, that little detour was to get to this. The World Wide Web is back, and right now, in some ways, it's benign. But eventually, under the Antichrist, it will be used to control everything that a person does, which we're already seeing in China. I mean, we're already seeing that in China. And by the way, folks, I'll digress one more time, and then we'll get back to the mound builders. You want to know why the Second Amendment is so important? Look what's going on over at Hong Kong. Yeah. Just watch what's going on over at Hong Kong. People don't have any guns. They can't fight back, can they? Can't fight back, can they? Oh, that'll never happen here, LA. Our government would never do that. Really? Talk to the American Indians about that at Wounded Knee. Just ask them what it was like when they gave up their guns and what happened at Wounded Knee. Just ask them and who did that, okay? So, don't be so stinking naive. And if you have all the gun control in the world, it's not going to stop some nutcase from getting a knife and killing people that way. Welcome to cons. So you can't legislate. You can't legislate this stuff. It's amazing how they come out with movies like with the goofy clown, I forget the name of it, and it's heralded as great achievement, the ultimate horror movie. Really? This is what we're putting out, and our kids go see this slime, this crap. This is, and then Hollywood has the audacity to lecture me about anything? Are you kidding me?
And we all feel it, man.
Preach it, brother.
We all feel it.
Yeah.
The technology that we always talk about, especially Basil and I on Canary Cry News Talk every week, we're seeing the CRISPR and we're seeing DNA alteration stuff, and it all, it's all kind of like, hey, we're doing it to help people and solve disease and all that kind of stuff. But in the back of our minds, we know kind of where this is headed. It makes sense that a similar thing from the days of Enoch, that some of this knowledge was handed to us again. And perhaps we're sort of in the process of rebuilding all of that stuff, rebuilding Babel, basically, in a sense, or Atlantis, if you want to call it that, before the flood, and controlling the people. That seems like a that seems like something that a lot of this technology is doing anyway, and being very invasive with tracking our behavior, all that kind of stuff. And you brought up China, and I actually tweeted out a video. Somebody videotaped a bunch of Christian people in Hong Kong just in this town square singing. I can't remember which song it was, but I'll maybe play the clip here later on. But it was amazing. It gave me chills. It was like a 5-second clip. And I was like, oh my gosh, our fellow brothers and sisters over there are gathering and singing, worshiping the Lord in this time. And it's just powerful to be able to see that. It's real. It's absolutely real. And the one thing about the internet, you say it's benign. It's because we can see things like that right now. We have the ability to kind of peer into other places of the world and see what's happening. But, once those things begin to lock down, it's really not going to be a good situation.
And they control it, and it will be used to enslave every man, woman, and child on this planet, guaranteed.
Yeah. What do you think is the timeline without setting dates? Of course, how long do you think or what kind of sequence of events do you foresee with rolling this stuff out?
Well, I mean, let's kind of walk through this. Let's go back 25 years ago. All right. So, I'm like 45 years old. I'm a student of prophecy. I'm looking at all this stuff. So if you were to tell me that by the time we hit 2019, there'd be 1.5 billion, that's with a B, 1.5 billion abortions worldwide, I would have just said, how can that possibly be? That's an unprecedented fact. In all of history, that's totally unprecedented. What does 1.5 billion people look like? Start up at the North Pole and travel down to Nome, Alaska, and then wind your way down the west coast of Canada and then go over to Toronto, and then wind your way down to Mississippi and go over to California, and then head down to Mexico and Central America and go through all the countries in South America. You would not see one person. That's what 1.5 billion people looks like. Everybody, North, Central, and South America would be gone, and then some. Would all be gone. That's what 1.5 billion. That's the first thing. If you had told me 25 years ago that our Supreme Court will legislate, right, judicial fiat from the bench, not the will of the people, they will just legalize same-sex marriage, and it'll become a law of the land, and they light up the White House in rainbow colors, I would have said, surely the church will push back. Surely this will not become law. Surely the church will rise up and take to the streets. Guess what? Right? Mm-hmm. Not a stinking thing. If you were to tell me 25 years ago that they would have drag queen story hour in kindergarten and first grade, drag queen story hour at the libraries, but would not allow a pastor to come in and teach these same kids about the 10 Commandments and who the God of the Bible is. In God we trust? What God are we talking about on our bills, on our currency? What God are we talking about? We're not talking about the Muslim God or the Chinese God or any other God but the Judeo-Christian God. And of course, if I say that, I'm a bigot. Oh, Marzulli's a bigot. Meanwhile, it's on all of our money. It's on all of our money. And God, what God are we talking about? The God of our fathers? And it's not the Masonic God either. I get all that. Some were Masons. But it's the God of the Judeo-Christian Bible. That's the God in whom we trust. Oh, you can't say that because if you do, you're being exclusive. So if you were to tell me that we'd have Drag Queen Story Hour 25 years ago, I would have just been, no way. If you had told me 25 years ago that we'd have a candidate like Bernie Sanders yelling and screaming about free stuff, and it's going to cost, the new Green Deal and $1 trillion for this and $15 trillion for that and all this other stuff, and basically taking the country and turning it socialistic, I would have said that will never happen here in a capitalistic society. The fact that the schools are so dumbed down and the kids aren't taught the difference between communism, socialism, and capitalism is exactly it. So now all the kids, the millennials, want free stuff. Just go to my YouTube channel. Oh, hey, this stuff should be free, man. Come on now. It should be free, all right. I'm living at home and I'm 30 years old, but all right. So it's like, that's what we get. How do you reason with that? You can't. Meanwhile, it costs us thousands of dollars to make a film, but they don't care. They just want it for free. They'll steal our stuff and put it up on YouTube. We had somebody steal the first watchers and put it up on their YouTube channel. They got like, a couple of thousand hits. We're just like, well, thank you. So I didn't get any money from that. The point I'm trying to make is we are rapidly approaching a point of no return, if indeed we've already crossed that Rubicon, as it were. You can't put this back in the bottle. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, the toothpaste out of a tube. You just can't do it anymore. I used to think you could fix it. I was hopeful at one period of time that the church would coalesce, that there'd be a movement. I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing exactly the opposite of that, where we're marginalized. The church is marginalized, laughed at, scorned at, pointed at, called bigots, called homophobes, Islamophobes, xenophobes, anything like that. We're marginalized in this country. And if a Democrat gets in, it'll be the freedom of speech that we enjoy now. Well, not for conservatives, not for conservative Christians, not for guys like, Gons and Basil and Marzulli. Nope. We got to silence their voices out because they're preaching hate. And that's where we are. So I think that, one more thing. This is the whopper, okay? If you would have told me that on Fox News, Tucker Carlson would have an F-18 pilot showing classified film, what was classified film, of an F-18, and then when asked by Tucker Carlson, well, what do you think this was, Commander Fravor? Commander Fravor said, whatever it was not of this world. That's Disclosure 2017. I'll be at the Branson conference coming up in Branson, Missouri next weekend, and I'll be talking about this whole disclosure thing and how, once again, the church is completely asleep. Won't even deal with it. Well, it got worse. That was 2017. So from 2017 to the present day, Tucker's had a variety of people, including Nick Pope and other people, talk about the UFO disclosure. And it all goes back to the dark side. The mounds that we're talking about go back. It's all fingerprints of the supernatural. It's all fingerprints of the dragon. That's who it is, just like all this UFO activity. So 2 or 3 months ago, Luis Elizondo is on Tucker Carlson. This was a scripted question, staged, in my opinion. Tucker goes, Mr. Elizondo, before I let you go, can you tell us whether the United States government has in their possession wreckage from a downed UFO? Elizondo looked right at the camera and says, yes. Then Tucker redirects and goes, are you saying that the United States government has debris from a crashed UFO? Elizondo hums and haws and makes this big, well, Tucker, I really pay attention to my non-disclosure agreement that I've signed, and that really means a lot to me. But the short answer to that is yes. Mr. Elizondo, I don't know you, sir, but I do know this, that you can't say that if you've signed an NDA. You can't say yes or no. The appropriate answer would have been, I am not at this time able to confirm or deny your question. Thank you very much. That's what you say. That's what you say. But he looked right at the camera and said, yes, the United States government has in their possession debris from a crashed UFO. So what are we supposed to do with this? The church is asleep. No one says anything. If you go to church and you say, did you see Tucker Carlson? Oh my God, you'll get the deer in the headlights look. Oh, that's that Gonzo guy with Canary Cry. Oh my God. He had Marzulli on, and that guy's really out to lunch. The problem is, it's like it's coming down, and the church dithers and won't talk about it, and essentially is asleep at the wheel. We're not going to delve into those subjects because we don't want to alarm our people. Meanwhile, your kids and your grandkids are watching Ancient Aliens and God knows what else, that stupid clown movie, right? That It movie. They're already being poisoned by all this nonsense, and there's no response because we don't want to disturb our young. It's like,
That's a perfect response.
Yeah. I always reference Revelation 13. Verse 4 talks about how they worship the dragon, who given authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying who's like the beast, who can make war against it. But, I read that and thought, well, I don't know that there's going to be open worship of the dragon. But if the dragon, connecting back to these serpents, or at least the Nephilim, into this genetic sort of abomination of God that still exists to this day, it kind of makes sense. Like, hey, they're gonna really pump up the PR for the dragon, and a certain segment of the population is going to be primed to accept the aliens, whatever package they present this man of sin, so to speak. that is probably going to be enhanced in some way, either genetically or whatever. We've theorized those aspects of it, but it really comes to show, like, okay, you're looking at the tangible evidence of these people or this race of beings that the Bible talked about, and we seem to have this type of evidence above ground here. Guys like LA, you got people getting threatened for talking about some of these issues. So it feels like they are really just tailoring society to get ready to accept this and to actually have this open worship of the dragon, which to me, even when I started looking at this, I was like, it's going to be really hard for people to accept in massive quantities of people worshiping the dragon. That's kind of a world that I can't really picture. But look, 8 years, not even a decade later, and I'm going, I think it's happening, especially with some of the music videos and stuff that are out there nowadays.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy.
What astounds me, what continues to astound me, is the connection between everything. I mean, all the types of sort of fringy stuff that we like to chat about here, and a lot of people on the internet like to chat about as well. The one thing that's hard to deny is how it fits all together. Yeah. And, going back to these mounds, I also... we've talked about the rise in witchcraft in America and things like that, and it would not surprise me to see those things become more popular.
Well, in the third film, Secrets of a Supernatural, which we really didn't talk about, but maybe let's kind of jump in with that. There's a section on the Mayan elders. The Mayan elders came up here in 2011 because they wanted to do ceremonies for the 2012 deal. So they come up here with 13 crystal skulls. They know what these sites are. They know exactly what they are. And Hunbat's man was sort of a lead shaman that came up. And I have film that was taken by somebody's iPhone and was up on YouTube. It had like three views. And I give them credit for it in the film, but I tried to contact them to no avail. But, it shows this procession of people, and then they're all chanting, and it's just alarming. It's like this... They're opening the gate, guys. That's what they're doing. They're opening the gate. These are highly charged areas. And the fact that the Mayan elders singled out the Serpent Mound and the Great Circle Mound, which they also did a ritual there. And Russ Dizdar comes on in the film, and he says that he talked to an archaeologist who was there when these guys came to the Great Circle Mound. And he said, Russ, when they were doing their ritual, doing their prayers and chanting and all this other stuff, he said the whole place lit up. The whole place lit up. And Chief Joseph corroborates that. I'm right there with it also. I mean, these guys know it was deliberate. They know exactly what they were doing, And that's why they went to these sites. So we had another guy, Pastor Tom Olson, who used to pastor a church in Newark, Ohio, near the Great Circle Mound, probably 5 miles away from the Great Circle Mound as the crow flies. Well, when he was applying for the job, he's a Lutheran pastor, the people that were, the committee that was set to hire him asked him, well, let me ask you something. Do you do deliverance? And he goes, well, no, I'm not sure what that is. So they hired him, right? And he's there, and he starts getting phone calls from his parishioners. Well, one of these people have a house which is built on the mound. And according to Pastor Tom Olson, they would open the door to the crawl space, and sometimes it would be a crawl space. Other times they would see a bottomless pit where they would throw objects like money or whatever down, and they would never hear it hit the bottom. Pastor Olson went into a home where a table was levitating. Another time, there were ghost wolves seen on the property. It just goes on and on and on. These are highly charged sites. And this is why Henry Gruver comes on the film. And thanks, Steve Quayle, for letting me use the audio from an interview Steve did with Henry Gruver years ago. When Gruver was doing prayer walks, he would go to these different sites that the Lord would tell him, and he would pray over them and reclaim the land. That's his ministry. That's what he was called to do. And he was driving home, and he saw this signage for the Great Serpent Mound, and he said, well, I'll go take care of this. Well, the Lord had not told him to do anything like this, but he went anyway on his own strength, as it were. problem number one. And he gets there, and it's snowing, lightly snowing. It's about 3 or 4 inches of snow on the ground. He's no one in the parking lot. He gets out of his van and he goes to the Serpent Head and he begins to pray and, does all of his thing. And he spends, 20, 30 minutes there praying. And he finally comes off the Serpent Mound and starts walking back to the parking lot. He is hit so viscerally, so hard in his solar plexus that he just crumbles to the ground, unseen force. Crumbles to the ground, laying in the snow. His knees are brought up to his chest. He can't move. And he realizes it's snowing. He realizes he's going to freeze to death. He realizes he's slowly freezing to death. He realizes. At this point, he goes to the Lord and says, Lord, why? And he's tried, up to that point, he's tried everything he can think of to break what's going on, and he can't break it. So he just finally goes to the Lord and said, Lord, why is this happening? And the Lord tells him, Henry, I didn't tell you to come here. You've been out on the road for 70 days. You're weak. Your spiritual energy is at a low. You need to go and get rested up, and then fast and pray. When I tell you to come back here with a team, and we'll take it on from there. So the Lord released him, because greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. And Henry staggers back to his van, gets in, throws this beaver blanket over himself, turns the heater on, and basically sweats out all the cold, and then drives home. This stuff is real. And that's why when we went in to make the film, we knew some of this, but we didn't really know what we were getting into. And I'll sort of close with this one story. This is all in the third film, Secrets of a Supernatural, Voices from the Other Side. So Fritz Zimmerman takes us to this place called Geller Hill. Geller Hill is it's the highest place in the county. It forms a perfect isosceles triangle between the Great Circle Mountain, the Octagon Mountain, and Geller Hill. Perfect isosceles triangle. It's about 1.5 miles away from each other. How do you do that in the ancient world without transits and stuff? So you can't. So the bottom line, but it's there. We feel that this site was an ancient burial ground for the giants. So we're there, and it's kind of misty, raining, can't fly a drone, can't really film. So we go into the woods. There's a woods about 50 yards away at the most. And we go into the woods, and the Newark Paranormal Group has asked to join us through Fritz. And so Fritz asked me, I said, sure, they can tag along. I don't know anything about these guys or what they're doing. So they've got these gadgets with them, and one of them is called an obelisk. Well, I didn't know what an obelisk was. I've since done research on it, and it holds about 5,000 words. And basically, it's a high-tech Ouija board. This is what it really is. It's necromancy, high-tech necromancy. So we go into the forest, and we go in, and it's not, we're sheltered from the drizzle. And this woman, Galen, turns on the obelisk and waits, and we hear the word evil. And we see it on the obelisk. And we film all this. So we walk down about 50 feet, and it spews out another word, witch. And at this point, I go, okay, and this is all on film. I go, wait a minute, I know what this is. I know what this is. So I take authority over it right there on camera. And I say, in the name of Jesus, we forbid you to access this machine. We cancel your assignment in the name of Jesus. You will no longer have access to this. And the Lord rebuke you. Just this type of prayer. No yelling or screaming, no theatrics, just a simple prayer to the Lord. So, the machine was on, and I had her turn off the machine at that point after I was done praying. And then I had her turn it back on. So we're waiting about 20 seconds. All of a sudden, the word holy comes up. And she'd never seen this. And her mouth just drops open, and she just looks to the left and to the right. She can't believe it, what she's seeing. Yeah. And the head of the Newark Paranormal Group, he said the same thing. They had never seen anything like this. So they shooed me out of there because I was ruining their fun. And they tried for like 45 minutes to get something, and they couldn't get anything at that point. We shut it down because greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. And as a believer, I have the authority when presented with situations like this to act in that authority, right. Just like I did when we were taking out the implant in patient number 17, which once again, they hijacked our film. It's on Netflix. It's called Patient 17. You can hear my voice in it, but I'm never mentioned in it. Meanwhile, we paid for the whole thing. But that's just how the game is played. Welcome to the cutthroat world who did
Alternative
what.
Fringe research, yeah. Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
So the machine.
But,
yeah, go ahead.
No. The same thing had happened with once I prayed. All of a sudden, the implant that we couldn't find with the ultrasound machine for an hour and 20 minutes came into view, and everybody went, "Oh my gosh, what's that?"
Yeah, the voice box machine. It's the Ghost Box Ovilus, Ovilus. I know it sounds like obelisk, but yeah, that was pretty astonishing. And I think it's important that you in the film you clarify that you weren't there, seeking to conjure demons or conjure the dead or anything like that, and actually you were confronted with it. So it's a different situation, and also that I think there's commentary from somebody, it was Gary Wayne or somebody else, that discusses how back in the day it was a lot of the Christians, the believers, they didn't like him when they walked into certain pagan areas because they would do the same thing. They would use the Lord's authority and take out the demonic activity there, and the people weren't able to make money. I think Acts 18, is it 18 or 19, talks about the woman who had the spirit of, I think it was a snake of some kind. And Python, yeah. And once they rebuked it out, the merchants were upset because that's how they were making their money. So, I think it's all the same now. It hasn't really changed a whole lot. Nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun, and that was the work of Dr. Ken Johnson.
Ken Johnson, okay.
Yeah, he's the one that brings that to bear. And, it's just, guys, this stuff is real. And, I challenge every pastor in America should see this because we're surrounded by it, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by this stuff. Every pastor in America needs to see what's going on because, we've already lost, for the most part, our children, this generation, to the internet, to these crazy movies that are out, to all the video games, and to witchcraft. I mean, the rise of witchcraft and the occult, and the reason why it's so prevalent is because guess what? They get to experience something. It's just not the same old formula that they see in church every Sunday. Will the men please come forward and receive the morning offering, meet and greet one another, sing 2 fast songs and 3 slow songs. It's just like, what? I mean, right? I mean, I'm part of a church and I love the church, but the church needs reformation. The church needs to allow the Holy Spirit to come in and